Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we have an unbelievable story of betrayal, greed, and a revenge so sweet you will want to hear every single detail. Before we dive into the storm, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you have ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life. These simple clicks help us bring more crazy stories straight to your screen. Now let us get right into it. I stood shivering in the freezing rain, my knuckles turning bone white as I gripped the frayed handle of my one faded duffel bag. The icy drops soaked right through my thin jacket, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice in my veins. I stared up at the $15,000 solid oak front door of my family estate. It was a massive, imposing piece of wood with custom ironwork, a door that had just been slammed shut in my face by the people who brought me into this world. My phone vibrated heavily in my wet pocket. It was a voicemail notification from my father, Silas. My fingers were so numb I could barely unlock the screen to press play. Then, his voice echoed through the tiny speaker, cutting much deeper than the biting wind ever could. "Never show your face at this house again, you thief," he spat, the disgust in his tone practically dripping from the phone. "You are no son of mine. Do not call your mother. Do not call your brother. You are dead to us." They actually believed it. My own parents were fully convinced that I had stolen $5 million from the family trust fund. $5 million. It was an absurd amount of money, a sum I could not even fathom holding in my hands, let alone stealing. But they were wrong. The real thief was sitting inside that warm, luxurious house right now, probably sipping a glass of $200 scotch by the fireplace. It was my older brother, Merrick. He had framed me flawlessly, orchestrating a financial illusion so perfect that it left me holding the bag while he walked away clean. And my parents, in their endless worship of their golden boy, threw me out like a bag of trash left on the curb. My chest burned with a rage so deep and dark I thought my heart would stop beating altogether. But I did not shed a single tear. I just stood there, cold, calculating, and wide awake for the first time in my life. But what my family did not know as I finally turned my back and walked away into the unforgiving darkness was that I did not just leave with my shame. I left with a tiny, crumpled bank receipt hidden inside my left shoe, a single piece of paper that would eventually burn their entire empire to the ground. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began, because a betrayal like this does not just happen overnight. It takes years of poison to build up to this level of toxicity. Growing up, I was the ghost of the family. You probably know the dynamic if you have ever browsed Reddit for more than 5 minutes. Every toxic household has a golden child and a scapegoat. I was the scapegoat, the one meant to take all the blame, absorb all the negativity, and stay quietly out of the way. Meanwhile, my older brother Merrick was the one meant to wear the crown. 10 years older than me, Merrick was everything my parents ever wanted in a son. He was handsome, charismatic, athletic, and eventually became a prominent, highly respected surgeon in our city. I, on the other hand, was just Callahan. I was quiet, observant, a bit awkward, and apparently a massive disappointment just by existing. I learned early on that my successes would always be ignored, swept under the rug as if they were embarrassing accidents. At the same time, my failures, no matter how small, would be broadcasted to the whole world as proof of my inadequacy. The rain continued to pour, washing over my face as I walked down the long, winding driveway of the estate. Memories flashed through my mind like a horrible movie playing on a loop. I remembered the exact moments I realized my family was broken beyond repair. The foundation of this betrayal was laid years ago, built on 1,000 tiny moments of unfairness that eventually twisted into something monstrous. I had always tried to be a good son. I really did. I did my chores without complaining, kept my head down, got good grades, and tried to earn just a fraction of the affection they showered on Merrick effortlessly. But their love was conditional, and the conditions were always rigged in his favor. As I walked further away from the estate, the heavy iron gates clanging shut behind me with a loud, final thud, the sound felt like a prison door locking. Only this time I was the one being locked out of the asylum. I like to call my childhood memory a museum of pain. Every exhibit is a shining example of how little I mattered to the people who were supposed to love me most. Let me show you my favorite piece in this twisted gallery. I was 16 years old. It was a warm, beautiful summer afternoon, the kind of day that feels full of endless promise and youth. Merrick had just finished his medical residency, and my parents decided to throw a massive backyard gala to celebrate his achievement. They hired a live jazz band, catered gourmet food, and invited half the town's elite. But the real spectacle was the gift. They bought him a brand new Ford Mustang. The car sat in our wide circular driveway with a giant red bow on the hood, gleaming under the bright sun. Everyone clapped and cheered. My father, Silas, stood on the patio and gave a long, emotional speech about how Merrick was the absolute future of the family legacy, a shining beacon of success. A week later, I graduated high school with top honors. I was the valedictorian of my entire class. I had worked late into the night for 4 years, studying until my eyes blurred and my head pounded, just hoping they would notice me for once. We did not have a gala for my graduation. We did not have a band or a speech. Instead, we had a quick, silent dinner at a local greasy diner because my mother did not feel like cooking. The table was sticky, and the smell of stale fryer oil hung in the air. As we waited for the check, my mother, Beatrix, reached into her designer purse and handed me a plain white envelope. Inside was a $50 gift card to a local bookstore. I tried to smile. I really tried to look grateful and say thank you, but my mother just sighed, looking annoyed by my presence, and took a slow sip of her ice water. "Do not think you are so great, Callahan," she said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "Your brother does 10 times better on his worst day. Try to be more like him, and maybe you will amount to something one day." That was Merrick for you, and that was the environment he thrived in. He was a master manipulator, a textbook narcissist wrapped in a crisp white doctor coat. He knew exactly how to play my parents like a cheap fiddle. Whenever we were in front of them, he played the supportive, caring older brother. But whenever we were alone, his charming mask would slip, revealing the ugly truth underneath. He would corner me in the hallway, adjusting his expensive silk tie, and smirk down at me. "Come on, Callahan. Know your place," he would whisper, patting my cheek condescendingly. "You are just the backup plan they never needed. Do not strain yourself trying to impress them." Merrick was terrified that I might actually succeed. He was terrified that my intelligence and hard work might one day overshadow his carefully constructed image. My parents were enablers of the highest order. They were not evil masterminds plotting my downfall, but their blind favoritism and desperate need to maintain a perfect public image made them entirely complicit in his abuse. To the outside world, we were the picture of the perfect American family. We went to church every Sunday, sitting in the front row. My parents sat on charity boards and donated generously to local causes. But behind closed doors, they used me as a stress ball. If the stock market dipped and my father lost money, it was somehow my fault for being a distraction around the house. If Merrick got a speeding ticket, it was because I had stressed him out by asking him a question earlier that week. The logic was twisted, insane even, but in their minds the golden child could do no wrong, which meant the scapegoat had to do everything wrong. I genuinely thought things would get better once I went to college. I thought distance would bring clarity, that moving away would force them to respect me as an adult. But I vastly underestimated the cruelty of a golden child who feels his spotlight is being threatened by the one person he views as beneath him. I went off to college to study accounting. I wanted to understand money, because I realized early on that money was the only language my family truly spoke and respected. While my parents fully funded Merrick's lavish lifestyle, paying for his luxury apartment and expensive vacations, I was left to fend for myself. I worked grueling, exhausting shifts at a campus cafeteria just to pay for my basic living expenses and textbooks. I smelled like old gravy and bleach half the time, but I did not care. I was building my own future. Going into my junior year, I was on the verge of securing a prestigious financial scholarship offered by the university's alumni board. It was highly competitive, but my grades were perfect. It would have covered my tuition entirely and given me a guaranteed internship at a top accounting firm in the city. I was finally going to break free from the financial anxiety that haunted me. I made the fatal mistake of telling my mother about it during a brief, obligatory Sunday phone call. I thought just maybe she would be proud. 2 days later, I received a devastating email from the scholarship board. They informed me that my application was permanently denied. The reason? They cited highly inappropriate, aggressive, and insulting emails sent directly from my student account to the board members. I was shocked. My hands shook as I logged into my university email and checked the sent folder. There they were. Vile, arrogant messages calling the board members incompetent dinosaurs, demanding the money as if I were entitled to it, and using profanity that I would never utter in a professional setting. I checked the login details. The IP address matched my hometown, specifically my parents' house, not my college campus. I knew immediately it was Merrick. He had somehow guessed my password, likely because he had watched me type it into my laptop during a holiday visit. He hijacked my future because he could not stand the thought of me achieving financial independence. He needed me to stay the struggling loser of the family so he could continue to shine brighter by comparison. Because I lost the scholarship, I could not pay the upcoming semester's tuition. My student loans spiraled out of control, piling up faster than I could process. I was evicted from my dorm room and had to sleep on a friend's lumpy couch for a month, eating ramen noodles and stealing extra bread from the cafeteria where I worked. Desperate and furious, I took a long bus ride home to confront my family. I printed out the IP login history, holding the papers like a shield. I stood in the living room, papers shaking in my hands, trying to explain how Merrick had sabotaged my life. My father, Silas, did not even look at the papers. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, glaring at me with pure disgust. Are you seriously blaming a renowned, saving lives surgeon for your own pathetic failures? He yelled, his face turning red. Look at you. You are a mess. You probably got drunk, sent those emails yourself because you cannot handle pressure, and now you want to drag your brother down with you. You are a destructive addict making excuses for your own laziness. When I turned to my mother for support, begging her to just look at the evidence, she just shook her head, let out a dramatic sigh, and walked out of the room, muttering about how I always ruin her weekends. At that moment, standing in my childhood home with proof of my innocence ignored on the floor, I realized I was entirely alone in the world. I could not rely on anyone. The desperation clouded my judgment, pushing me toward the worst mistake of my entire life. I decided to work for the very man who destroyed me. Hey guys, let me take a quick pause here. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by your own flesh and blood, only to have the rest of your family take their side? Let me know down in the comments, because what happens next will make your blood boil. I was drowning. The debt collectors were relentless, calling my phone at all hours of the day and night. My bank account was deep in the red, and my mental health was hanging by a thread. I was working 3 minimum wage jobs just to afford a tiny, moldy apartment on the bad side of town where the sirens never stopped wailing. That was when Merrick swooped in, playing the role of the benevolent, forgiving savior to perfection. He drove his sleek, silver sports car to my rundown neighborhood, stepping over dirty puddles in his custom leather shoes like a king visiting the slums. He knocked on my door, looked around my cramped apartment with barely concealed disgust, and offered me a lifeline. He told me he was opening a new, massive private medical clinic and needed someone he could actually trust to handle the bookkeeping. I want to help you get back on your feet, little brother, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy and concern. Come work for me. The pay is good, the hours are flexible, and you can finally clear those ugly debts. It hurts Mom and Dad to see you struggling like this. I should have slammed the door in his face. My gut screamed at me that this was a trap, a setup designed to humiliate me further. But hunger, constant stress, and eviction notices taped to your door have a funny way of silencing your survival instincts. I agreed. I packed my meager belongings and moved to a slightly better apartment closer to his shiny new clinic. Looking back, the irony is thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. The very financial skills I honed while working in his viper nest were exactly the tools I used to bring him down later. On my first official day, Merrick called me into his lavish corner office. The room smelled of expensive cologne and rich mahogany. He slid a thick stack of paperwork across the glass desk. "It is just standard HR procedure," he said casually, barely looking up from his phone. "I need your ID, your social security details, your digital signatures, and full access to your personal bank accounts to set up direct deposit and clear you for handling clinic funds. We run a tight ship here, Callahan." I did not question it. I was so desperate for the paycheck, so eager to prove I could be useful, that I signed everywhere he pointed. I handed over the keys to my identity without a second thought. As I handed the papers back to him, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the large window behind his desk. The smug, triumphant look in his dark eyes made my stomach drop into my shoes. He had me right where he wanted me. I thought I was grabbing onto a life preserver thrown by a changing brother, but he was actually tying a concrete block to my ankles, carefully preparing to throw me into the deepest part of the ocean. The trap was set, and I had walked right into it, smiling and saying thank you. The trap snapped shut 3 months later, catching me entirely off guard. It was a normal Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my small desk in the back office, sipping a cup of cheap break room coffee, when I logged into my personal bank account to see if my monthly paycheck had cleared. I needed to pay my electricity bill that day. Instead of my usual $2,000 balance, the screen displayed a number that made my heart stop. Over $5 million. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, thinking the website was glitching. But before I could even process the massive string of numbers, the screen refreshed automatically. The money was gone, transferred out in a dozen rapid, split transactions to a series of offshore shell accounts that I did not recognize. Blind panic set in. I grabbed my coat, ready to sprint down the street to the local bank branch and freeze everything in my name. But before I could reach the office door, it flew open with a violent crash. My mother, Beatrix, stormed into the room, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Before I could utter a single word of confusion, she raised her hand and slapped me across the face so hard I saw stars flash in my vision. The sharp crack echoed through the small room. I stumbled back, hitting my hip against the edge of the desk, the metallic taste of warm blood instantly pooling in my mouth. Right behind her walked Silas, flanked by 2 large security guards, and Merrick. Merrick was putting on the performance of a lifetime, a true masterclass in manipulation. He looked devastated. He was rubbing his temples, shaking his head, playing the heartbroken victim perfectly. "I cannot believe you, Callahan," Merrick said, his voice shaking with fake sorrow. "I gave you a job when no one else would. I gave you administrative access. I did not think you would use it to drain Mom and Dad's retirement fund and the clinic's emergency reserves. How could you be so greedy?" I stared at him, absolute horror washing over me as the puzzle pieces violently clicked together in my brain. He had used the personal banking details, the signatures, and the access I gave him for that fake HR procedure to route stolen family money straight through my account. He made me the perfect fall guy, leaving a digital paper trail pointing directly to me, before sending the cash off to wherever he was hiding it. I tried to speak. I spit the blood from my mouth and tried to explain that I had nothing to do with it, that I had just seen the money bounce through my account seconds ago and was about to report it. Silas stepped forward, his eyes cold and dead, devoid of any paternal warmth. "Do not say a single word," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. "My lawyers are already drafting the paperwork as we speak. You are disinherited. You have zero claim to this family, our assets, or our name. The only reason I am not calling the police right now and having you dragged out in handcuffs is to save the family name from the embarrassment of a public trial. Get out. Pack your garbage and get out. If I ever see you again, I will personally turn every piece of evidence over to the authorities." I did not argue. There was no point. I grabbed my faded duffel bag and walked out of the clinic, out of their lives, and into the freezing rain. They thought I would crawl into a hole and die quietly on the streets. They thought they had won. But they forgot one crucial rule of human nature. A dog backed into a corner, beaten and starved, is the one that bites the hardest. I spent the next year living in a waking nightmare, surviving on pure spite. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like a physical wound in my chest that refused to close. I rented a tiny, noisy room above a dive bar on the edge of the city, and took a grueling job stocking heavy shelves at a local hardware store. I was a ghost once again, moving through life in a quiet daze, constantly trying to understand the motive. Why would Merrick need to steal $5 million when he was already making a fortune as a top-tier surgeon? He had the house, the cars, the beautiful wife. He had everything. Why risk it all, and why use such a massive amount of money just to destroy me? The answer fell right into my lap on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in aisle 4, covered in dust, organizing heavy steel chains, when two rough-looking guys walked into the store. They did not look like local contractors or weekend DIY guys. They wore expensive leather jackets, had thick tattoos creeping up their necks, and looked like pure trouble. I stayed hidden behind a tall display shelf, holding my breath, as they talked in hushed, irritated voices. "Man, Dr. Merrick better have the shipment ready by Friday," one of them muttered, grabbing a box of heavy-duty trash bags. "The boss is getting really impatient. The feds are cracking down on those unapproved pain meds coming across the border. If Merrick cannot wash the cash fast enough and move the product, we are going to have a serious problem. And you know how the boss handles problems." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Unapproved medications. Washing cash. The cartel. Suddenly, the stolen $5 million made perfect, terrifying sense. Merrick was not just a greedy golden child looking to ruin his little brother. He was in way too deep with a dangerous organized crime syndicate. He was acting as their pill pusher and their personal money launderer. He had stolen the family money to pay off a massive, looming debt to the underworld, and he used my bank account to wash it clean, knowing my parents would sweep it under the rug to avoid a scandal. He had not just framed me for theft. He had framed me for massive federal crimes. I knew I could not go to the police yet. I had no solid proof, no paper trail, just the overheard word of two thugs against a highly respected, wealthy surgeon. I needed an ally. I needed someone who knew the family's dark side. I needed Uncle Gideon. Gideon was my father's younger brother, the black sheep of the previous generation who had cut ties with Silas decades ago because he saw right through the narcissistic toxicity. I called Gideon from a payphone outside a gas station. He listened to my wild story in absolute silence, then told me to meet him at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When I laid out the pieces, tracing the timeline of the money and the thugs, Gideon did not doubt me for a single second. He looked at me with sad, tired eyes. He handed me a thick envelope of cash. "I want you to buy a decent laptop and some basic forensic accounting software," Gideon said, his voice firm. "You have the first piece of the puzzle, Callahan. Now it is time to dig a grave for their pride. Go get him and do not hold back." The next 2 years were a blur of relentless, quiet, burning obsession. I worked at the hardware store during the day, lifting boxes until my muscles screamed, and taught myself advanced forensic accounting and legal protocols late into the night. I drank cheap coffee and stared at spreadsheets until my eyes bled. Eventually, my hard work paid off. I landed a job as a forensic paralegal at a gritty, aggressive downtown law firm that specialized in uncovering complex corporate fraud and embezzlement. I was incredibly good at it. I knew exactly how arrogant criminals hid their money because my own brother had done it to me. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life from the ashes. I was making $150,000 a year. I paid off every single cent of my student loans. I moved out of the room above the dive bar and rented a nice, quiet apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I was living well, eating healthy, and staying entirely under the radar. My family thought I was dead or homeless, and I let them believe it. Meanwhile, I used my new skills and firm's resources to keep close tabs on Merrick. From the outside, his medical empire was booming. He opened 2 more private clinics, bought a luxury yacht, and lived like a king. But my deep, late-night dives into public financial records and shell company registrations showed tiny, spiderweb fractures in his foundation. The unapproved drug money was creating massive inconsistencies in his tax filings. The cartel was clearly squeezing him tighter, demanding higher returns. Then, the true catalyst arrived, the moment that set the final stage. It was past midnight on a cold Thursday. Heavy rain lashed against my apartment windows, reminding me of the night I was thrown out. A frantic, heavy knocking echoed from my front door. It was irregular, desperate. I walked over, looked through the peephole, and frowned in deep confusion. It was Sloane, Merrick's beautiful, incredibly spoiled wife. She was drenched to the bone, her expensive designer coat completely ruined, her mascara running down her cheeks, and her eyes wide with sheer panic. I opened the door slowly. She practically fell inside, gasping for air, trembling like a leaf. "Callahan," she sobbed, clutching her wet luxury purse to her chest. "The police, the federal agents, they are starting to ask questions around the clinics. They are investigating Merrick for the drug shipments and the money. You are the only one who knows the legal loopholes. You work for that fraud firm now. You have to help him. You are the only one who can save him from going to prison." I stood there, perfectly calm, looking down at the woman who had stood next to my brother and smirked at me when I was thrown out into the freezing cold with nothing but a duffel bag. I felt a slow, dark, genuine smile creep across my face. The agonizing wait was finally over. The game was finally about to begin. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you a serious question. If the family who ruined your life, the people who threw you out on the street to take the fall for their golden child, suddenly came crawling back to beg for your help, would you agree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I looked at Sloane, standing in my hallway, dripping expensive rainwater onto my clean hardwood floor. 2 years ago, she was standing right next to Merrick, wearing a smug, superior smirk as I was escorted out of the clinic like a common criminal. Now she looked like a drowned rat. Her designer mascara was running down her pale cheeks in thick, dark rivers, and her hands were shaking so violently that her diamond wedding ring kept clicking against the clasp of her purse. She stepped further into my apartment, looking around at my nice furniture, my clean walls, the life I had built from the ashes they left me in. She looked surprised that I was not living in a cardboard box under a bridge. "Callahan, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "You have to listen to me. The feds raided the downtown clinic this morning. They took computers, patient files, everything. Merrick is a mess. He has not slept in days. The cartel guys are threatening him, and the police are closing in. He needs a forensic legal expert. He needs someone who knows how to hide the paper trail, someone who can find a loophole. We know you work for that big fraud firm now. We know you are good at this. Please, you have to save your brother." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms over my chest, letting the silence stretch out until it became suffocating. I wanted her to feel the weight of her audacity. "You knew, did you not?" I asked, my voice calm, barely above a whisper. 2 years ago, when Merrick transferred that $5 million through my account and blamed me for the theft. You knew it was him." Sloane looked down at her ruined designer shoes. She swallowed hard, her silence giving me all the confirmation I needed. "Yes," she finally whispered, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "I knew. But Callahan, you have to understand. We had just bought the new house. I was pregnant with our first child. If he went down for stealing from the family and laundering drug money, I would have lost everything. I would have lost the country club, the cars, my entire social circle. I had to protect my family." I let out a harsh, dry laugh that echoed in the quiet apartment. "Protect your family?" I repeated, stepping closer to her. "By destroying mine? By letting Silas and Beatrix throw me out into the freezing rain with a ruined reputation and a mountain of debt? I almost starved, Sloane. I almost lost my mind living in a roach-infested room above a bar while you were sipping champagne on a yacht bought with dirty cartel money." She reached out, trying to grab my arm, but I stepped back in disgust. "We will pay you," she pleaded frantically. "Whatever your firm charges, we will double it. Just tell us what to do to make the federal agents look the other way." I walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open, letting the cold night air rush into the apartment. "The price of your silence 2 years ago was my life," I said, my voice turning into sharp ice. "Now, the price of your betrayal is sitting back and watching your husband's illegal empire burn to the ground. Get out of my apartment, Sloane." She stared at me, her eyes hardening as the desperation morphed into vicious anger. "You are making a huge mistake. Callahan, she hissed, her true colors finally showing through the tears. Merrick is still their golden boy. Silas and Beatrix will never let him go to prison. They will crush you if you do not help us. She stormed out, her heels clicking aggressively down the hallway. I closed the door, locked it, and poured myself a glass of water. I slept like a baby that night. The very next morning, my phone buzzed on my nightstand. It was a text message from a number I had blocked a long time ago, but it had somehow come through as an urgent carrier alert. It was from Silas. Callahan, we know where you are. We know what you do now. Come to the estate tonight at 8. We need to talk. This is about family business. I read the message 3 times. They were truly cornered, backed against a wall by the feds, and in their twisted, arrogant minds, they still thought they could summon me like a disobedient servant. I replied with a single word. Fine. But I was not going as their son. I was going as their executioner. I did not go straight to the family estate. As soon as I sent the text to Silas, I got dressed in my sharpest custom suit, the kind of suit that commands respect the second you walk into a room, and drove straight to the downtown precinct. I walked into the organized crime division and asked for Detective Soren. Soren was a seasoned, tough investigator I had met during one of my law firm's corporate fraud cases. He was the kind of guy who hated corrupt rich people more than anything else in the world. I sat in his cramped, coffee-stained office and laid everything out on the table. I told him about the $5 million, the unapproved cartel drugs, the fake HR documents, and the fact that the golden boy surgeon was currently panicking because his walls were closing in. Soren listened intently, taking rapid notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his squeaky chair and looked at me. We have been trying to nail Dr. Merrick for 18 months, Soren said, rubbing his jaw. We know he is moving the cartel product, but the guy is a ghost on paper. His money laundering structure is incredibly complex. If we cannot prove he orchestrated the initial $5 million theft to fund the operation, federal prosecutors will never authorize a full racketeering indictment. We need a confession. We need him to admit he set you up. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. My parents just invited me to the family estate for a meeting tonight, I said. They want me to help him. If I know my father, he is going to try to bribe me or threaten me into taking the fall for Merrick again. Give me a wire. I will get him to confess to the whole thing. Soren did not hesitate. An hour later, I was sitting in an unmarked van in a parking lot a mile from the estate, while a tech officer taped a microscopic recording device to my chest, hidden perfectly behind my silk tie. The wire was transmitting a live audio feed directly to Soren and his strike team, who would be waiting in the shadows outside the estate perimeter. When I pulled up to the massive iron gates of my childhood home, my stomach tightened for a fraction of a second, but then the training took over. I was not the terrified, broke college student they threw away. I was a professional. The heavy oak door swung open before I even knocked. My mother, Beatrix, stood in the foyer. She looked terrible. The confident, arrogant woman who had slapped me 2 years ago was gone. Her face was gaunt. Her expensive makeup could not hide the dark circles under her eyes, and she looked like she had aged 10 years. Callahan, she whispered, her voice trembling. Come into the study. Your father and brother are waiting. I walked into the dark, mahogany-lined study. Silas was sitting behind his massive desk, swirling a glass of amber liquid. Merrick was pacing the floor like a caged animal, his tie undone, his hair disheveled, looking nothing like the flawless, brilliant surgeon he pretended to be. When Silas saw me, he did not apologize. He did not ask how I had survived. He immediately shifted into negotiation mode. Sit down, Silas ordered. I remained standing. Silas gritted his teeth and continued. Your sister-in-law tells us you are working for a major fraud firm now. You know how the feds operate. Merrick is in a minor misunderstanding regarding some clinic funding and some pharmaceutical suppliers. The authorities are blowing it way out of proportion. We need you to take the heat. I raised an eyebrow, staring at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. Take the heat? I repeated. You want me to confess to federal drug trafficking and money laundering? Merrick stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes wide and frantic. You do not have a family to support, Callahan. He shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I have a wife. I have a child. I have a medical license. The cartel is threatening to kill me if I do not fix this. You are single. You are used to struggling. You can handle a few years in a minimum security prison. Mom and Dad will pay you $3 million when you get out. We will set you up for life. Just tell the feds you stole the money and ran the drug ring behind my back. It was the most sickening, selfish demand I had ever heard in my entire life. They genuinely believed my life was worth sacrificing just to keep their golden boy on his pedestal. I took a deep breath, knowing Soren was listening to every single word. I am not doing anything, I said slowly, letting my voice carry clearly through the room, until someone tells me exactly what I am taking the fall for. No lies, no minimizing. I want to hear the truth about the $5 million. I want to hear how you framed me. Tell me everything, Merrick, or I turn around and walk out that door right now, and you can deal with the cartel yourself. The silence in the study was heavy, thick with tension and the smell of expensive bourbon. Silas glared at me, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Do not push your luck, boy, he growled. We are offering you $3 million. You have never seen that kind of money in your miserable life. Just nod your head and do what your brother asks. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Merrick. My terms, I said, my voice steady and cold. Tell me exactly what you did, Merrick. Start from the beginning, or I leave. Merrick looked at our father, panic flashing in his eyes. He was breaking. The pressure from the federal investigation and the death threats from the cartel had shattered his arrogant facade. He rubbed his face with trembling hands and finally cracked. Fine, Merrick yelled, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Fine, I will tell you. 3 years ago, I got into gambling debt with the wrong people. The cartel. They offered to wipe my debt if I used my private clinics to push their unapproved painkillers. I agreed, but they demanded a massive upfront deposit to ensure my loyalty. $5 million. I did not have it in liquid cash, so I used the administrative access you gave me to drain the family trust and the clinic reserves. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. I routed the funds through your personal accounts to wash the origin. He continued, pacing frantically again. I forged your digital signature on the transfer orders. When Mom and Dad found out the money was missing, I blamed you. I knew they would believe me over you. I knew they would kick you out and sweep it under the rug to avoid a scandal, giving me the time I needed to move the cash to the cartel. Are you happy now, Callahan? You got your confession. Now take the deal. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph course through my veins. The wire picked up every single syllable. I reached into my leather briefcase and slowly pulled out a massive, thick file folder. I tossed it onto the heavy wooden desk. It landed with a loud thud. What is this? Silas demanded, staring at the folder. That, I said, straightening my tie, is a fully documented forensic trail. It contains every single IP address you used to forge my signature, Merrick. It contains the offshore routing numbers you used to pay the cartel. It contains the encrypted text messages between you and your suppliers, which I managed to recover from the clinic servers. It is the physical evidence of your entire illegal empire. Merrick turned pale, his jaw dropping in absolute horror. Beatrix gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, finally realizing the true monster her golden boy actually was. Silas stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. He was shaking with rage, but this time, the rage was directed at me. You ungrateful, vindictive little rat, Silas roared, rounding the desk. You would destroy your own brother? You would destroy our family name over a petty grudge? I will kill you myself. He lunged at me, raising his fist to strike me across the face, just like Beatrix had done 2 years ago. I did not step back. I stood my ground, ready to block the hit. But the blow never landed. Before his fist could connect with my jaw, the deafening, shrieking wail of police sirens pierced the night air, echoing through the massive windows of the study. Blue and red lights began flashing violently across the walls, illuminating the sheer terror on my family's faces. What did you do? Merrick whispered, backing away from the windows, his voice barely a squeak. "I did not take the fall," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I brought the fire to you." The heavy front doors of the estate were breached with a loud crash. Heavy boots thundered across the marble floors of the foyer. Silas froze, his fist still hovering in the air. Beatrix collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. The game was over, and the house of cards they built on my suffering was finally coming down. Detective Soren kicked the study doors open, leading a squad of 6 heavily armed federal agents into the room. They moved with terrifying precision. "Nobody move," Soren shouted, his badge shining in the flashing lights from the windows. "Merrick, you are under arrest for federal money laundering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and wire fraud." Merrick screamed as 2 agents grabbed his arms, slamming him face first onto Silas's pristine mahogany desk. They wrenched his arms behind his back, the cold steel handcuffs clicking shut with a sound that felt like pure music to my ears. He was sobbing, pleading for his mother, begging them to stop, looking like a pathetic, broken child instead of a respected surgeon. Beatrix tried to run to him, but an agent held her back. Silas just stood there, his face completely drained of color, his chest heaving. He looked at Soren. Then he looked at me, realizing the terrifying magnitude of what I had done. "Callahan," Silas rasped, his voice trembling for the first time in his life. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you will take the deal. We will give you 5 million. 10 million. I walked over to the desk, standing right next to where Merrick's cheek was pressed against the wood. I leaned down, looking directly into my brother's terrified eyes. "There is a fun little plot twist you should know about, Silas," I said, turning my head to look at my father. "I did not just bring the police tonight. I acted as a registered federal whistleblower. I provided the evidence the government needed to secure a RICO indictment. And under federal law, when a criminal organization is dismantled, all assets tied to the illegal enterprise are frozen and seized." Silas blinked, the words not fully registering in his panicked brain. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "The 5 million Merrick stole from the family trust was used to fund the drug ring," I explained, speaking slowly so they could absorb every drop of the poison. "And because you, Silas, knowingly helped cover up the initial theft to protect your golden boy, the portions of the family estate, investment portfolios, and clinic assets that can be traced to the laundering scheme are now exposed to court-ordered forfeiture." I pulled a legal document from my briefcase and handed it to Soren. The detective held it up for Silas to see. "Effective 20 minutes ago," Soren announced, his voice booming in the quiet room, "a federal judge signed an order freezing all domestic and international accounts tied to this family. $12 million in total assets. Your accounts are locked, Silas. Your credit cards are dead. This house is now evidence in a federal investigation." Silas's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He clutched his chest, gasping for air as the reality hit him like a freight train. He had chosen the golden child, and the golden child had dragged him straight to hell. Silas's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, weeping loudly. As they dragged Merrick out of the room in handcuffs, he looked back at me, his face twisted in pure hatred. "I hope you rot, Callahan," he screamed, fighting the officers. "I hope you rot." I just smiled, adjusting my suit jacket. "Enjoy the prison food, Merrick," I replied calmly. "I hear it is not very gourmet." I walked out of the estate, stepping out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, and the sky was clear. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. Hey guys, if you have made it this far into the story and you are loving this sweet, sweet justice, drop a W down in the comments right now. That W stands for win, because we are finally watching the toxic people get exactly what they deserve. I will be reading through and hearting every single comment that has a W in it, so do not miss out. Now let us get into the final fallout because it gets even better. Fast forward 6 months. The fallout from that night in the study was nothing short of apocalyptic for my family. The federal trial was a media circus. Every local news station covered the spectacular downfall of Dr. Merrick, the brilliant surgeon who ran a secret cartel pharmacy. Because of the wire recording I provided, his defense team had absolutely nothing to work with. He could not deny the money laundering, and he could not deny framing me. The judge was merciless. Merrick was permanently stripped of his medical license, barred from ever practicing medicine again, and sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. 10 long, miserable years. But the destruction did not stop with Merrick. As I had warned them, the federal government moved swiftly to seize the family assets. Silas and Beatrix were dragged into court, humiliated and exposed as enablers who tried to cover up a massive crime to protect their image. To pay for Merrick's astronomical legal fees and to settle the massive civil fines levied against them, my parents were forced to liquidate everything. The $15,000 oak door, the Persian rugs, the vintage cars, it was all auctioned off. They went completely bankrupt and had to move into a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment in a terrible neighborhood on the edge of town, right near the dive bar where I used to live. The social fallout was just as brutal. The flying monkeys, the wealthy aunts, uncles, and family friends who had happily supported my parents when they threw me out, instantly turned their backs on them. Nobody wanted to be associated with a family tied to a cartel indictment. Silas was kicked off his charity boards. Beatrix was shunned at the country club before her membership was officially revoked for non-payment. They became pariahs, isolated and despised by the very high society they had sacrificed me to impress. Meanwhile, my life took a very different turn, because I acted as an official whistleblower in a major federal fraud and narcotics case. I was entitled to a percentage of the recovered illicit funds. The government awarded me a massive whistleblower bounty, $2.5 million, tax-free. I walked out of the courthouse with a check that changed my life forever. I did not buy a sports car or a yacht. I invested the money quietly, expanding my forensic consulting firm with Uncle Gideon and Detective Soren, who decided to retire from the force and join the private sector. We built a business dedicated to tracking down hidden assets for victims of corporate and familial fraud. I was sitting in my brand new corner office, looking out at the city skyline, sipping a great cup of coffee, when my private cell phone started buzzing. I looked at the screen. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was familiar. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it rang again, and again, and again. By the time I finished my morning meetings, I had 46 missed calls and 12 frantic voicemails. I finally sat down at my desk, pressed the speaker button, and listened to the messages. It was my mother, Beatrix, and she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I listened to the 12th voicemail, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. "Callahan, please pick up." Beatrix sobbed through the phone speaker, the sound sharp and desperate. "Please, you have to help us. Your father had a severe stroke last night. The stress of the bankruptcy and Merrick going to prison, it was too much for his heart. He is in the intensive care unit at the public hospital, and his insurance was canceled. They are demanding a massive deposit for his surgery, and we have nothing. We are going to lose the last small clinic space we own because we cannot pay the rent. I know you got the reward money. I know you are rich now. You have to save your father. Please, we are begging you." I sat in silence for a long moment, watching the city traffic move far below my window. I thought about the night I stood in the freezing rain, holding a cheap duffel bag, listening to Silas's voicemail telling me to never show my face again. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "Callahan. Oh, thank God," she cried. "I knew you would not abandon us. I knew you still had a good heart. We need $50,000 immediately for the hospital, and then we need—" I cut her off. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of any emotion. "Do you remember the voicemail Silas left me 2 years ago?" I asked. Beatrix went dead silent on the other end of the line. "What?" she whispered. I asked if you remember the voicemail. I repeated slowly. He said, "Never show your face at this house again, you thief. You are no son of mine. You are dead to us. Do you remember standing there watching him throw me out and not saying a single word to defend me?" "Callahan, that was a mistake," she stammered frantically. "We were manipulated by your brother. We were confused. You have to forgive us. We are your family." Forgiveness is for people who are actually sorry, I replied coldly. You are only sorry because you are broke. But I did not call to argue with you, Beatrix. I called to give you a business update. You mentioned you are about to lose the lease on your last remaining small clinic space in the South District. Yes, she sobbed. The landlord is kicking us out on Friday if we do not pay the back rent. It is the only thing we have left to generate any income. Please, you have to help us pay it. I smiled, though she could not see it. I do not have to help you pay it, I said, because I am the landlord. There was a sharp intake of breath on the phone. What? She choked out. I used a portion of my whistleblower money to buy that commercial building last month. I explained, enjoying the sheer poetry of the moment. I own the property. And as your new landlord, I am officially denying your request for a lease extension. Your eviction notice is being taped to the clinic door right now. You have 48 hours to remove your property before I change the locks and throw whatever is left into the dumpster. Callahan. No, Beatrix shrieked, her voice echoing with absolute despair. You cannot do this. We will be on the street. Silas is dying. You are a monster. No, I replied softly. I am just the ghost you created. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone. I blocked the number, instructed my receptionist to route any calls from her name to the spam folder, and permanently deleted the voicemail. The heavy, suffocating chain that had tied me to that toxic family for 28 years finally snapped, dissolving into dust. The next day, I went down to the county courthouse and filed the paperwork to legally change my last name. I wanted absolutely zero connection to the people who had tried to destroy me. I took my Uncle Gideon's mother's maiden name. It felt like a rebirth, a final shedding of the scapegoat skin I had been forced to wear for my entire life. My private investigation and forensic accounting firm took off. Working alongside Gideon and Soren, we built a reputation for being ruthless against corporate bullies and family fraudsters. We help people who are in the exact same position I was in, the black sheep who are being manipulated, gaslit, and robbed by narcissistic golden children and enabling parents. Every time we win a case, every time we recover stolen funds for a scapegoat, I feel a deep, settling peace in my soul. I never checked to see if Silas survived his stroke. I never checked to see where Beatrix ended up living after I evicted them from the clinic building. And I certainly do not check the federal prison registry to see how Merrick is doing in his 6x8 concrete cell. They made their choices and they are paying the price. People often talk about forgiveness like it is a mandatory requirement for healing. They tell you that you have to let things go, that family is family no matter what they do to you. But I learned the hard way that forgiveness without accountability is just an invitation for more abuse. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm, even if they share your blood. Now, I want to turn it over to you guys, the jury of the internet. A lot of my extended relatives, the flying monkeys who never lifted a finger to help me when I was homeless, have been sending me nasty emails calling me a cold-blooded monster. They say I went too far by letting my parents go bankrupt, evicting them, and ignoring my father while he was in the hospital. They say I should have shown mercy because they gave me life. So, I need to know your honest verdict. Did I go too far by acting as the whistleblower and freezing all their assets? Was I wrong to deny them the hospital money and evict them from the building I bought? Or did I simply serve them the exact same cold dish of karma they handed me 2 years ago? Sound off in the comments below. I am going to be reading all of your opinions and debating with you guys down there. If my story resonated with you, or if you just love a good tale of absolute, uncompromising karma, please do me a massive favor and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on these crazy Reddit stories. Thank you so much for listening. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.